The impossible survival. Imagine being lost in the middle of the ocean. No land, no food, no fresh water, no rescue. Just endless waves stretching to the horizon. Now imagine surviving there. Not for a day, not for a week, but for 438 days. More than a year floating in the open sea. No human contact, no shelter, only the will to survive. This is the unbelievable true story of José Salvador Alvarenga, the fisherman who became lost in the vast waters of the Pacific Ocean and somehow lived to tell the tale. A normal day that changed everything. In November 2012, José Salvador Alvarenga left the fishing village of Costa Azul for what should have been a routine fishing trip. For years, he had worked as a fisherman along the coast of Mexico. Fishing was his life. The ocean was familiar territory. That day, he set out with a young fishing partner named Ezequiel Cordoba. Their small fiberglass boat was simple. No cabin, no advanced navigation, just a motor, a GPS, fishing gear, and hope for a good catch. At first, everything seemed normal. The sea was calm, the nets were ready. But the ocean had other plans. The storm. Just hours into the trip, dark clouds began gathering over the horizon. Winds grew stronger, waves rose higher. Within minutes, the calm ocean transformed into a violent storm. Massive waves slammed into their small boat. Rain poured down so heavily that visibility disappeared. The two fishermen tried to steer back to shore, but the storm was too powerful. The engine struggled, the GPS stopped working, and soon, they lost all sense of direction. The storm lasted for days. When it finally passed, something terrifying became clear. They were no longer near land. They were drifting into the endless waters of the Pacific Ocean. The realization. At first, the two men believed rescue would come quickly. Search teams would notice their absence. Other fishing boats might find them. But days passed, then weeks. No ships appeared. No planes overhead. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. Soon, their food supplies ran out. Their drinking water was gone. They were completely alone. Learning to survive. To stay alive, Alvarenga had to adapt. He began catching fish with his bare hands. He grabbed seabirds when they landed on the boat. Sometimes he even caught turtles. Everything became food. Nothing could be wasted. Fresh water was even harder to find. Without it, death would come quickly. So whenever rain fell, Alvarenga collected it in bottles and containers. When rain was scarce, he drank turtle blood or even his own urine. The struggle for survival became a daily battle. The mental battle. But hunger and thirst were not the only enemies. The endless ocean created another danger: isolation. There was no land to look at, no voices to hear, no human contact, just waves, day after day. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the loneliness began affecting Cordoba. He struggled with fear and hopelessness. He stopped eating. He believed they would never survive. Alvarenga tried to encourage him, but eventually the young fisherman became too weak. One day, he died. Now Alvarenga was completely alone, floating in the middle of the ocean, with only the sound of waves for company. Alone in the ocean. The death of his companion nearly broke him. For days, Alvarenga talked to the body of his friend. He didn't want to accept the truth, but eventually he realized he had no choice. He gently placed the body into the ocean and watched it disappear beneath the waves. Now, the silence was even heavier. There was no one left, just him and the endless sea. The fight to stay alive. Despite the overwhelming loneliness, Alvarenga refused to give up. Every day he followed a routine: catch fish, collect rainwater, stay alert for ships, survive. Sometimes he saw distant cargo ships. He waved desperately, but they never saw him. His small boat was almost invisible among the massive waves. Months passed. His hair grew long. His skin burned under the tropical sun, but somehow he kept going. Drifting across the ocean. Without realizing it, the ocean currents were slowly carrying Alvarenga across one of the largest oceans on Earth. From the coast of Mexico, he drifted thousands of miles westward, across the enormous Pacific Ocean. For more than a year, he survived storms, scorching heat, and complete isolation. Most people would have given up, but Alvarenga kept fighting. Scene 9, 438 days later. Then, in January 2014, something incredible happened. After drifting for 438 days, finally land appeared on the horizon. It was a small coral island in the remote Marshall Islands. At first, Alvarenga thought he was hallucinating, but the land was real. Using the last of his strength, he swam to shore. For the first time in more than a year, his feet touched solid ground. The discovery. Local island residents were shocked when they discovered him. A thin, sunburned man with tangled hair and beard. Barely able to speak, barely able to stand. At first, they thought he might be a ghost, but soon they realized something incredible. This man had survived alone at sea for more than a year. The world reacts. When the news reached the outside world, people could hardly believe it. Surviving 438 days in the ocean seemed impossible. Doctors examined him carefully. They were amazed. Despite extreme hardship, his body had adapted. His muscles were still functioning, his organs were still healthy, and his mind, despite the unimaginable isolation, remained strong. It was a rare example of how the human body can endure extreme conditions when survival becomes the only goal. Returning home. Eventually, Alvarenga returned home to El Salvador. He reunited with his family after more than a year of uncertainty. For them, it felt like a miracle. The fisherman who had vanished into the ocean had somehow returned alive. Final reflection. The ocean is one of the most powerful forces on Earth. It can destroy ships, swallow entire cities, and leave people lost without hope. Yet somehow, one man managed to survive there for 438 days. His story reminds us of something extraordinary. The human spirit is stronger than we imagine. When everything seems lost, when survival seems impossible, sometimes the will to live can carry a person farther than anyone believes. And in the endless waters of the Pacific Ocean, one fisherman proved exactly that. A body that refused to quit. When José Salvador Alvarenga arrived on land in the Marshall Islands, doctors expected to see someone near death. After all, he had spent 438 days drifting across the vast Pacific Ocean. But the medical results surprised everyone. Yes, he was thin. Yes, his skin had been damaged by months under the burning sun. But remarkably, his body had adapted to survive. His muscles were still functioning, his organs were still healthy, and his mind, despite the unimaginable isolation, remained strong. It was a rare example of how the human body can endure extreme conditions when survival becomes the only goal. The power of routine. During interviews later, Alvarenga explained something important about his survival. He never allowed himself to stop trying. Every day had a routine. Wake up, search for fish, look for birds, collect rainwater, scan the horizon for ships, and survive another day. That routine became his lifeline. Without it, the endless emptiness of the ocean could easily have broken his spirit. But as long as he kept moving, he kept hope alive. Conversations with the ocean. Loneliness can destroy the human mind. Many people who become isolated for long periods begin to hallucinate or lose touch with reality. But Alvarenga found strange ways to stay mentally strong. He talked to the birds that landed on his boat. He spoke to the fish he caught. Sometimes he even spoke to the waves themselves. To an outsider, it might sound strange, but for a man drifting alone for more than a year, those conversations kept his mind active. They reminded him he was still alive. Close calls with death. During those long months drifting through the Pacific Ocean, there were many moments when survival seemed impossible. Violent storms sometimes pushed his small boat to the edge of destruction. Huge waves crashed against the hull. Wind tore at everything around him. At times, the boat nearly flipped. During those nights, Alvarenga held on to whatever he could and waited for the storm to pass. Each time he survived, it felt like a miracle. Encounters with wildlife. The ocean is full of life, but for someone alone on a small boat, that life can be both beautiful and terrifying. Sometimes dolphins swam near his drifting vessel.
Other times, massive sharks circled beneath the boat. He watched giant sea turtles rise to the surface. Birds landed nearby, resting briefly before flying away. These creatures became part of his strange world. They were reminders that even in the middle of an endless ocean, he was not completely alone. The psychological war. But the greatest battle was happening inside his mind. There were days when hope felt impossible. Days when hunger, thirst, and exhaustion pushed him toward despair. At those moments, Alvarenga thought about his family. He imagined seeing them again. He imagined returning home. Those thoughts became his motivation. They reminded him why he needed to keep fighting. Because somewhere in the world, people were waiting.
The ocean's long journey. Ocean currents slowly carried his small boat across thousands of miles. From the shores of Mexico, he drifted westward across one of the largest bodies of water on Earth. The journey lasted more than a year. Few people in history had ever survived such an ordeal. The vast Pacific Ocean had tested every limit of human endurance. Yet somehow, Alvarenga kept moving forward. The moment land appeared. Then one day, something changed. In the distance, Alvarenga noticed a shape on the horizon. At first, he thought it was just another illusion. After months alone, his mind sometimes played tricks on him. But the shape grew larger and clearer. It was land. After 438 days drifting across the ocean, he had finally reached the islands of the Marshall Islands. Walking on land again. When he reached shore, Alvarenga could barely walk. His body was weak after more than a year at sea. But when his feet touched solid ground, something incredible happened. The endless drifting had finally ended. The man who had once been lost in the largest ocean on Earth had survived. A story the world couldn't believe. When the story spread across the globe, people were stunned. Surviving for 438 days at sea sounded like something from a movie. Experts examined the evidence carefully. They studied ocean currents, they reviewed weather patterns, and everything pointed to the same conclusion. The journey had really happened. Alvarenga had truly survived one of the most extreme ordeals in modern history. Returning to life. Eventually, José Salvador Alvarenga returned to his home country of El Salvador. His family welcomed him with tears and disbelief. For them, it felt like a miracle. A man who had disappeared into the vast Pacific Ocean had somehow come back alive. Final reflection. The ocean is unpredictable. It can destroy ships, swallow entire fleets, and leave sailors lost without hope. Yet one fisherman survived there for 438 days. His story reminds us that the human spirit is incredibly powerful. When survival becomes the only choice, when hope seems impossible, sometimes the strength of the human will can overcome even the greatest forces of nature. And in the endless waters of the Pacific Ocean, one man proved that survival is sometimes stronger than the sea itself.